to Ask Earl Anything, number 15. Take 2. Yes, take 2. Believe it or not, I'm doing the whole episode over again because my camera was not in focus. That's a terrible feeling when your camera's not in focus. I used my camera to record my gig last weekend. I had somebody else working it. He went into manual focus. I thought it was doing autofocus for me. It didn't, and I have 20 minutes of just terrible video, even though I had some great answers to questions. Your questions make the show, and I really want you guys to know that next week's show, I'm going to be taking my questions a little bit earlier in the week. So any questions that come in from Friday to about Sunday at 12 noon are going to probably make the show, and I'm going to try to cut this video Sunday afternoon as opposed to doing it midweek like I normally do. I usually almost give it a week for you guys to get the questions in. So any questions I miss from this episode that are not on the next episode will be on the Ask Earl Anything 17 episode. Now, if I get no questions, maybe there won't be an episode next week. So your questions make the show, so please leave questions. So let's start right up at the top. And believe it or not, this guy slips in because he just wrote this question right before I had to start this over again. So my first question comes from Stick Boy. Stick Boy. It's S-T-I-X-B-O-I. And he asks the question, if you can you do double time swing? Alright, so I'm going to try to explain double time swing. Alright? So, if a normal swing beat is, that's the normal swing beat. Double time swing means you double it up. And yeah, that was a terrible ending, but you get the idea. So the doubled up swing thing is you're just doubling the time. That's why I believe you're asked the question. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now, I will say this, when you're playing that doubled up swing thing, you're going to still accent the 2 and the 4, but it's going to be twice as fast. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. It's this concept is called what Billy Ward calls big time, okay? And when I'm doing double time swing, I'm not counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I'm playing double 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. So I'm thinking the big time. Anyhow, Stick Boy, I hope that helps and answers your question. You got to be number 1 on Ask Earl Anything today. Alright, my second question comes from 2112 Drums. I know that because I already did this show. He asks, how do I avoid getting a copyright strike on my videos on YouTube when I use somebody else's music? That's basically the paraphrase of the question. My experience with YouTube is that I put all my videos into private mode. Meaning whenever I put a video up on YouTube, it's not to public consumption. So if for some reason I've got a copyright issue, it's not going to anybody but to me. Okay, and it never gets out to the public eye. And what I have found with YouTube, I have not experienced any strikes on the couple videos that I had that were squashed down and basically said you cannot post these videos, they will be blocked everywhere, and even got threats about them. The 2 videos, Bob Dylan, What Can I Do For You from the Saved album, cannot be put on YouTube. The second song was Paul Simon's 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. You cannot put that song in its original state and try to do a drum cover over top of it. It's just facts of life. So my way of experiencing getting around getting any strikes is to put every video up in private mode. Alright? So I hope that helps. I will tell you that the other way to do it is to basically go on to their Creator Studio section, and there's a place you can go in and you can actually search songs that are you're going to have copyright infringement. Now, most of us that are doing covers on YouTube get this one all the time, this email on our Gmail, which basically says, no problem, no worries, you can use this cover, but realize you don't own it and you won't be able to monetize it. So I've gotten used to that, by the way. Alright, the next one is from 2112 Drums 2. He says, what are your favorite cymbal and drum companies, and do you play any other instruments besides drums? So, second question first. My main instrument is drums. I do play little keyboards, but I don't really play keyboards. When I was in college, I played mallet instruments like xylophone, marimba, and vibraphone, and bells, orchestral bells, and timpani, which were tuned instruments. But my forte is drum kit and percussion, hand percussion. So I play those instruments. I've never really played guitar, even though I have a funny story about college. When I was in college, I had a guitar teacher. He was the adjunct guitar teacher at the time. And he was a cut-up. And he had a gig on Thursday nights, and he'd come into class on Fridays. And I was in class with my roommate. My roommate could kind of play guitar. He actually learned how to play guitar. My roommate was a multi-instrumentalist back in the day, and today it's really important you're a multi-instrumentalist. I had no head for that when I was in college, by the way. Playing piano to get through college was a hard enough thing for me. I didn't become a music teacher. I got a BA in music, meaning I don't have a music education degree, even though I took a whole bunch of ed courses thinking I was going that direction. And one of these courses was guitar methods. So anyhow, back to my guitar method story, and it is a funny story. We cut up in that class all the time with the teacher. This was back in the day when teachers were kind of fun and cool, and they were we'd sit around in a circle and try to play acoustic guitars we had for our class. And for the midterm, we were told to play an E Phrygian scale, an E major scale, an E minor scale, and we had to learn about 10 chords. And the hardest chord we had to learn on the guitar was a B7 chord. And I still can kind of make the finger, the way the finger looked on the fretboard, because I learned 2 chords on the guitar, A minor and B7. That was it. Of the 10 chords, I learned 2 chords, the hardest chord and probably the easiest chord. And I was having a hard time with the E major scale, E minor scale. So it gets to the midterm in this class, and the teacher's late as always on Friday mornings. He was always late. So we're all hanging around, and finally we gave up, and I ran into one of the percussion rooms, was hanging out with one of my buddies, and then about, the class was at 9, so about 9:30 I come by and I see him in the room. I said, oh crud, better get my guitar, grab my guitar, and I go into class. And he goes, okay, Mr. Bennett, glad to see you today. Come on, it's your turn. Now my roommate was just in the hot seat, and he just did an E Phrygian scale, an E major scale, a couple other scales, a couple chords. He went through about 5 or 6 chords. He goes, okay, Mr. Bennett, sit down in the chair. Here's what I want you to play. Play a B7 chord. I go, oh, this? Bling. He goes, great. You pass. I sit down, the next guy goes up, and that's my midterm. 1 chord, I get an A on the midterm. It wasn't until my jury at the end of the class, my final jury for the class, that I had to play Michael Rode the Boat Ashore, that I just botched it up. And I'm sitting in there solo with this teacher, and he says to me, I thought you knew how to play guitar. Of course, I couldn't play guitar. Not a lick of guitar. I got an A for that class, just so you know. So that was one of those classes in college I actually got through. So anyhow, The guitar gene went to my son. My son's an amazing guitar player and bass player, and he studied music and he taught guitar for a lot of years. So the guitar gene got passed to my son. Just want that teacher to know. I can't remember his name either, but he was a great guy. And anyhow, that's my other instrument story. So thank you for asking the question, 2112 Drums. Thank you. My next question comes from 2.15 Band, and he asks the question, what's your ideal tom cymbal setup? Like 2 rack toms, 1 floor, 2 crashes, ride, hi-hat, 3 crashes, 2 rides, 1 hi-hat, double or single pedals, cheers. Okay, I think you're from Australia, you said cheers. You might not be, that's very kind of funny. Alright, I don't have a preferred setup, just like I don't have a favorite cymbal or drums. And by the way, I did get asked that question too, which I didn't answer. I think that's another part of the question, because 2112 Drums asked us the question, what's your favorite cymbals, drum company? That was the other part of that other question that I didn't answer. So, favorite drums, favorite cymbals, favorite setups. First off, there is no such thing for me as a favorite drums, favorite cymbals, or favorite setup. I will say I prefer Gretsch drums. I've used Gretsch drum my whole life, so if I wanted to say I love Gretsch drums, I would say that's true. I'll never sell this Gretsch kit here. This is my kit from college. Gretsch drums have done me a great service my whole life, and I love playing Gretsch drums. But I also love Ludwig drums, Noble Cooley, Craviano. I think any professional level drum kit, Tama Star drums, I think they are all excellent drums. So you can't go wrong. And if I had the money today, I'd buy one of those Star kits, those Tama Star kits. They look, excuse me, they want to do the Jeff Porcaro video thing where you're burping. If I had the money, I'd buy one of those Tama Star kits. I think they're beautiful drums. They look so pretty. Yamaha Recording Customs. Gosh, there's so many great drum kits out there. As far as cymbals go, you all know I love my Paiste cymbals. Lots of Paiste cymbals here today. But I love Zildjian and Sabian. And by the way, I played Sabian for about 20 years solid. The last 5 or so years I've been toying around with Paistes and Zildjians again. I played Zildjian early in my career. I've played Paiste late in my career consistently. I mean, I've always had a few Paistes in my arsenal. But I really dig the way Paiste B8 sounds on, you know, on these videos, and I get a lot of good response about my cymbal sound. So I'm a big fan of my Paiste cymbals. But I love the Zildjian cymbals, and I'll tell you a Zildjian cymbal that is similar to the Paistes in frequency range that I really like, which I think if I don't buy them soon, they're probably not going to be around pretty soon, like the Kropes may not be around, is the Avidus Zildjian cymbals. They sound beautiful. They are beautiful A's that have a frequency range similar to these Paistes. And I think I know what the thing is. The Paiste Giant Beats are thin 60s sounding cymbals. And the Big Beat, it's in that 60s vein cymbal, thin cymbals. The Zildjian Avidus cymbals are really thin A Zildjians. And they have that beautiful high-end shimmer. I don't know, I'm kind of digging the high-end thing now, even though I had a whole bunch of years playing, 20-something years playing Sabian HHs from the 80s. So, I've got plenty of dark cymbals, and I love dark cymbals, but I've been really digging that high-end shimmer of the Paiste thing for a while now, and I think I like some of the newer A's. The new A's seem to be going back to that thinner thing, and the Avidus line sounds really cool. Sabians have gotten really heavy. I don't know what the problem is with the newer Sabians. And even the Artisans, which I was trying to buy an Artisan ride when I bought my Kropes, they just didn't seem to have what the Kropes had, that dark thing even. So, but Sabians, I will tell you, are the #1 selling cymbal in the world right now. And I was playing Sabians back in the 80s when nobody was playing Sabians at the time, except for Phil Collins and a whole bunch of other great professional drummers. But, I mean, Sabians were kind of looked down as like, oh, you can't afford Zildjians. And by the way, I bought Sabians because they were cheaper. That's the thing about Sabians. They were about $15 cheaper per cymbal from like 1983 when they were introduced in the United States till probably about 2000, and all of a sudden it flipped the prices, and Robert Zildjian, who was running the Sabian company, his cymbals became more popular than Zildjian, and today they're the top selling cymbal in the world. So congratulations, Sabian. Great cymbals, Sabian. Great Zildjian cymbals. Zildjian's a great company. Pisces makes great cymbals. Ludwig makes great drums. All these companies do. Now, as far as setup goes, for a gig, I prefer a 4-piece kit because I don't want to carry stuff. 1 rack, 1 floor tom, 1 snare drum, 3 cymbals. But, as you can see in my drum videos, I love using different configurations. I have another friend on YouTube. His name is Mike. He plays some really great covers. He doesn't have a lot of subs, but he watches every once in a while. And Michael. And Michael has this beautiful Bennett kit. You guys have seen him. I forget his last name. I was chatting with him today on YouTube, back and forth about a compressor I use on my snare drum, and he just bought. Michael's got these Bennett drums, and he has a huge Bennett kit with all these cymbals. And I think he's going to get into multi-cameras finally, because I've been saying, I want to see what these drums look like close, you know, and I always get the front camera view. So I think he's going to go into some multi-camera stuff. But he never changes the kit out, and he has piles of drums around him. Dude, if I had piles of drums around me, I'm going to move those kits in once in a while just to make it a little bit more appealing, because that's what turns me on a video. Sometimes I'll just watch it, I'll flip through YouTube and find a YouTube drummer, and I see an interesting setup, and I'll go, let me watch this guy. I love these guys who play the minimalistic kits with the different stacks and things. I'll just watch those videos for some reason. Even though the music doesn't appeal to me all the time, it's the setup that's kind of cool. So I love different setups, and I love goofing around with drum sets. But as you get older, you learn your back likes smaller drums. And last weekend, when I had to walk 250 feet across to the back end of the yard from the front end of the driveway, with my drum kit, I wished I had my little wretch kit. I wished I actually had one of those rims headless kits. I don't know if you ever saw them back in the 80s. They had these drums that were just made on rims mounts. They weighed nothing. You carried them in with two bags, your snare and your cymbals in one bag, and it was just set up and they were all attached. It was a real piece of junk, but it just was so light. And I'll tell you, last weekend carrying drum stuff really did my back in, so I didn't stretch enough apparently. Anyhow, hope that answers all those questions. Next question comes from Tacken Drums, and Tacken asks a question about my beaters on my bass drum. He says, what beater do you like to use on your bass drum for dance music? Well, considering all the music I play is kind of dance music for some generation, depending on if it's 40s or whatever, or 50s or 60s music. I don't play a lot of 50s music, but my favorite beater for my bass drum is a square felt Zorro beater, but made by Danmar, USA. That's my favorite beater. Now, the square beater has a history. The history comes through John J.R. Robinson, one of my favorite drummers. John J.R. Robinson was playing a square ProMark beater back in the 80s. On a lot of sessions. He was the first guy I read about that said he played that square beater. I got one of them. I loved it. Then I lost the beater somehow, like a lot of things in life. And it took me years to get this square beater. I picked this up about, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. I think I picked this one up in Nashville. I think I bought it at Forks Drum Closet a couple years ago. And love the beater. I have a wooden square beater too. It's right next to it. Actually, that's the wooden one, and that's the felt one. I can't play double bass, as you all know. Anyhow, with that said, square beaters are my favorite. Now, I also like those Vic Firth beaters that flip from the kind of thin to flat. I like to hit the bass drum flat and straight on if possible. That's kind of my goal. But I have a lot of different beaters. I've got a set of the wooden round beaters. I've got a set of the Danmar round beaters. I've got one of those nice puffy beaters, like the lamb's wool beaters. I've got an original DW beater with that's kind of plastic, and it's kind of a square head in the tradition of the Rogers beater. Actually, Rogers made that beater first, which flipped over. It actually flipped around and had a little spring compression. Now, the DW one doesn't have the spring on it, but the Rogers had a spring. You flipped it around. You can flip it around on your drum, go from felt to the hard plastic. I also have a similar one that's pearl. I think for certain dance music, well actually, for certain metal music, you want kind of a clickier sound. If you want a clickier sound, you're going to go with a hard plastic. If you want a thumpier sound, you're going to go with kind of a felt beater. But for my sound, I find the flat, square beaters are the coolest sound that I get, and I like it. Now, on my drum covers, I'm also using a special secret weapon I use in my drum channel chain on my kick and my snare. And this goes back to my friend Michael. We were talking about what do I use to get my snare to pop the way I have been on the last month. I've been kind of using it a lot on my snare drums. And the device is a SPL Transient Designer. Now I'm not using outboard gear, I'm using the UAD version of it. But the Transient Designer really gives the pop and the sustain. And it's got two controls. One is pop, more presence, okay, more bite, and the other one's more sustain. And you can actually back off the bite and put up sustain, or back off the sustain, put more bite, or you can put them together. Use it very sparingly, but I use it on kick and snare lately, and I get a lot of good response with my kick drum and my snare drum sound lately. So that's my special little tool, SPL's Transient Designer UAD plugin, but there is a hardware version of it. It's a great tool, and there's a couple other guys that make Transient Designers. There's a free one out there. I forget the name of the company. I have it. If I think of it, I'll put it in comments or something at some point. But anyhow, that's that one. And my last question comes from AR Drummer, my friend Adam. And Adam asked the question, what's my favorite construction of a snare drum? Is it brass, wood, aluminum? You know, what's your favorite construction of a snare drum? Now, asking that question is about as hard as picking my favorite line of cymbals or my favorite drums. I have about 11 snare drums in my house right now, ranging from a 5x13 Omar Hakim mahogany snare drum, pearl, to a 10x14 Yamaha marching snare drum. I've got an 8x14 Black Magic brass snare drum, which is killer. I've got a 5.5x14 Black Beauty, a 5.5x14 Noble Cooley solid shell, 1-ply with reinforcing rings maple drum. Those two get a lot of play here. I've got a 6.5x13 Steve Jordan drum. Okay. And two of my favorite drums, one being my walnut finish, walnut wood DMR custom snare drum that looks like a Radio King. I've talked about that a few times. That's one of my favorite snare drums, but my most favorite snare drum is my DMR custom drums 6.5x14 cast aluminum snare drum that is black, that's powder coated black. And it's actually the same shell that's used on the Gretsch 6.5x14 cast aluminum drum that's kind of a brushed aluminum. And it was made for me by a guy named Dan Rotelli, DMR Custom Drums. And the story goes like this. Dan had an ad in Craigslist about 10 years ago. It said, I will trade custom drums or vintage drums for drum lessons. And I called the ad first. He was 5 minutes down the road, went to him on lunch hour, hung out with him, talked to him, showed him I could play, and then he said, okay, let's do something. He goes, what do you want? He had all kinds of stuff in the store, including those concert toms that I have. I got those from Dan, but I traded some cymbals for those concert toms, him and his partner. But as the story goes, he had on his workbench a cast aluminum shell that he just brought back from Taiwan. He was at the factory in Taiwan where they make the shells for the Gretsch snare drums and the DW snare drums that are cast aluminum. Yes, this is made in a factory in Taiwan. I think they're called Ping drums. I think that's the Taiwanese brand name of these drums. They're only sold in Taiwan, maybe in Japan, maybe in Asia, but I know they're sold in Taiwan. But you can't get these drums in the United States, and they make that shell. And they were making a shell like that for Gretsch, and one for DW, and one for Peace drums. A lot of the companies were getting these cast aluminum shells there 10 years ago. And he had brought one home. He was getting ready to do a hardware deal on his DMR custom drums, as the story goes. And he went to the factory, brought the shell home, and when he brought the shell home in his suitcase, he got a little scratch on it. And I wanted to keep it brushed aluminum because I thought it looked really cool brushed aluminum. I knew the drum was going to sound amazing because I heard a Gretsch one. I heard a 5x14 Gretsch cast aluminum drum, and I loved it. And when I found out it was the same shell, I thought 6.5x14 was the bomb. And it is, by the way. That drum has gotten, I've had more comments about that drum from drummers that hear it out in the real world. They go, wow, where'd you get that drum? And it's got, the drum is actually called the Hammer. It's the Hammer model drum. I got 001, the first version. He did about 3 or 4 of these, sold 3 or 4 of these drums. Actually, Rich Redmond's got one of these drums. He gave Rich Redmond one of these drums. He did a red powder coating on the hardware. So it got red rims and red powder coating on it, and the black shell. You know, but it was the same drum. He gave one to Rich Redmond. That's kind of a cool story too. He did that after he made mine though. But mine is cast aluminum and sounds great. And when Dan came back with a little scratch on the drum, he said, I don't really want to make it with the scratch. Can we get it powder coated? And I picked a powder coating that doesn't leave fingerprints on it. So it's a beautiful powder coated drum, and it's my favorite drum, and I use it on a lot of videos. It's got tube lugs on it. Sounds amazing. So that's my favorite snare drum, cast aluminum. And it's kind of like the Ludaloys, you know. The Ludwig Ludaloys are aluminum drums, and there's something about the sound of certain aluminum drums, or the Acrylites, you know. So now, I love brass drums, don't get me wrong, and if I could have a 6.5x14 brass beauty, I'd be using that a lot. Just like I use my 5x14 Black Beauty a lot. So brass is a great sounding drum too, and if I'm going to get a wood drum, I want a solid shell drum. Solid shell, 1-ply drum is my favorite. Okay. So Adam, I hope that answers your question. This is Ask Earl Anything. Next week's show, I'm going to ask you guys to get your questions in as early as possible. Okay? Just want to let you know that because I've got a trip planned for next week. And I may not be home to do that video on time. So I want to do it earlier in the week before I leave for my trip. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I'm getting close to 1,000 subs. There's still a symbol I'm giving away. Please help me get to 1,000 subs. I appreciate it. Thanks for your questions. Your questions make the show. Have a great day.